So again, welcome everybody. We've got a great webinar for you today. The rumors of 2.4 gigahertz death have been greatly exaggerated. We've got a special guest today, Lee Badman, CWNE number 200, great friend of the show. And as always, we've got Jim Vada, CWNE 183, and Seven Signals Chief Wireless Officer. So if you don't mind introducing today's guest a little bit while I hand the controls over to Lee, and we'll get going.
Yeah, happy to. So we're always happy to have Lee join us on our webinars. Lee is the wireless network architect in a large higher education institute here in the US. He's CWNE number 200 and a prolific and very entertaining blogger at wirednot.wordpress.com. So Lee, are you ready to go?
I am indeed. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Don. You guys are awesome, and thanks for having me back.
Absolutely.
So let us dig in. Hopefully you guys this is what you expected to see as we dig in. If not, you're welcome to stick around anyways and maybe learn something, maybe get some good discussion going at the end. But we're talking about 2.4 gig on today's session. That's me. I can't say enough good about me. That's all we need to know. And let's get right to the topic. So 2.4 gigahertz. I'm going to start off the session with a couple of thoughts. This is the first one, right? Things don't just die because we'd like them to. If they did, my thoughts alone would reshape the world drastically if I had that kind of ability. 2.4 gets a bad rap for a lot of reasons, right? We know that there's just a ton of stuff in the ISM band, which is where Wi-Fi plays, the 2.4 gig ISM band. Hopefully many of us know that we've got, channels that are limited to 20 meg. There's only 3 non-overlaps, right? All of these things are kind of counted as, part of what makes 2.4 gig less impressive than 5 and now 6 gig. But again, that doesn't mean it's done. My second thought, not all use cases are identical. There's a lot of reasons to not wash it or wish it away. Just because it may not be as versatile. I don't even want to say as good because that's kind of a bad descriptor. It may not be as versatile or as flexible as the other spectrums now that Wi-Fi uses. But that really is not enough reason to put it in a box and put it away and give it away. And we'll talk about all of that a little bit. So if you were to do what I just did, and this was, the other day, within the last few days, 2.4 gig is dead. Kind of a goofy thing to search on, but look at the number of results. And the first one that came up, the leading reply, this dates back to 2018. I don't really know what gigabit is. I see it's in the US, but the leading sentence there, or I see it's in the UK, excuse me. The leading sentence there, to answer the question of this article, we can say it's not dead, but it will be soon. It's kind of crazy. If you do that search, and I would say take a look at, actually open up the first 10 or 15. You don't have to read them, but look who wrote some of this stuff. I will perhaps unkindly say that it's a lot of overzealous wireless professional type people, and you're going to probably recognize some names, people that have sounded the death knell. And I'm not throwing dirt on anybody. I'm just really stating fact here. The dirt I will throw, you've got a lot of journalists who really don't get technology that are writing about it, that sometimes pick up on the vibes that the wireless professionals are throwing out there, and they run with it. And these are the same kind of people, the journalist types, that don't know the difference between data rate and throughput. And they believe every tall tale that comes out of Silicon Valley marketing, and they buy into stuff and they write articles and they get paid because that's their jobs. But 6.5 million results about 2.4 gig being dead. Tells me that it's something that gets brought up perhaps too often. So, there's a couple of aspects to 2.4 gig. There's this tension, right? You've got the wireless types like us, me, Jim, certainly, probably most of the audience. We want the wireless world to be better. We don't want things to be in 2.4 because we know 5 gig is so much better. It's a desire, it's a want, it's something that we try to make systems, influence the client devices and get everything you can into 5. And that's all worthwhile endeavors, and that's all part of our jobs. But at the same time, we are dealing very much so with device manufacturers who may not be so hell-bent on, seeing 2.4 not be used, and it leaves users in the middle. We're telling our customers everything should be in 5, and sometimes they got devices that can't be in 5, and we'll talk about some of that. But sometimes it just gets a little heated, and again, we need to be a little more aware that this band is not dead, and maybe the device has to be there for a reason that we have to understand and accommodate. That's just reality. And again, this will build up a little more, and we'll get into the specifics here. When it comes to 2.4, there's also history. It is basically the oldest spectrum. If you go back to the original 802.11 and forget about 900 meg and forget about infrared and things that used to be part of what we, at least on paper, needed to worry about. 2.4 gig is old spectrum, right? It's retro. It's the oldest stuff we've got. The standards that make use of it, 11 original, the B and the G, N, it's optional. Maybe yes, maybe no. Very likely yes. But it all depends on what you buy. So even though I say maybe, it's really a yes. We skip 11 AC because when you buy an 11 AC dual band AP, you're really getting 11N on the 2.4 side because AC does not have 2.4. Just a reminder on that. But then our very latest standard, 802.11ax, aka Wi-Fi 6, both bands are there. Well, okay. Why are both bands there? It's supposed to be dead. Well, let's explore that. So, as I mentioned before, the argument, the wave of calling it dead and beating that drum, right? A lot of times it's kind of a little bit of cult of personality. Somebody of name and title and industry renown declares it dead, and other people get on the bandwagon and they retweet it, and everybody works themselves into a froth. It doesn't change reality. To me, there's other more important drums to beat. Like, boy, I'd love to see better interoperability testing out of the Wi-Fi Alliance. I would like to see, under the heading of true standards, I'd love to see vendor X able to manage vendor Y APs. I'd love to see a consumer certification out of the Wi-Fi Alliance and an enterprise certification. And there's all kinds of drums I would like to beat that would actually improve things. And for some reason, the 2.4 being dead is one of the loudest things we hear. And it's really, too often. Basically, when you get new spectrum, when you get new devices, right, and you get new narratives that come from Silicon Valley, it doesn't mean the old stuff just goes away. We're not flipping switches with anything that's new doesn't kill off the old. It just doesn't work that way. And at the bottom of this slide, I'm building up the tension for the thing that, I'm saying perhaps most importantly, wait for it, it's valuable spectrum. You know, I chuckle a little bit just out of sometimes disbelief that people actually want it to go away. In my opinion, we absolutely would be idiots to let it go. I won't read you that quote there, but the whole notion of getting spectrum that you can use, if you ever follow these processes, it's hard to come by. And all you have to do is look at the ham radio world and radio hobby world to know that, you know, there's something that happens to spectrum that gets abandoned, and we'll work up to that. But boy, it's just something that we might want to slow down and not shoot ourselves in the foot about. My question, do you know what happens to abandoned spectrum? You know, if we could wave the magic wand, move all the devices to 5 gig and 6 gig now that that's available to us, what becomes of 2.4? You know, if we kill it off, what becomes of it? Well, the answer that goes in that blank is it's going to get repurposed. The FCC is going to take it away and say, you guys aren't using it anymore. They're going to give it to other people to use. So we get, you know, excited when we gain spectrum. Are we really willing to lose? Are we really, you know, willing to let some go? It's dead, right? We don't need it anymore. So the whole topic to me, I think it gets, you know, I'll be unkind. I think it gets a little bit stupid at times. You know, often the stuff that's great about 5 gig is kind of BS. You can use wide channels. How many of us actually use wide channels? Certainly there is more channels. There are times when we need the better propagation that you get from 2.4 over 5. I mean, it's just, it's not a, too often the discussion is not approached with critical thought, and it's not approached with reason. It's just this gung-ho, by golly, everything should be in 5, and that's all there is to it. We know that there's a decent balance of performance versus range and penetration. We know that not all devices need the whopping speeds that you find outside of 2.4. It's a pretty heterogeneous client space out there these days, and not everything needs the best when it comes to performance, the best when it comes to radio conditions, and it's just really silly to live in that place, to me. But it's not just my opinion that kind of backs that up. If we look at what's going on in the real world, this is one view of a large wireless network. It's mostly BYD. Actually, it's a mix of BYD and some managed devices, but the majority is BYOD, large university. And this is thousands and thousands of devices. Doesn't matter if it's 2,000, doesn't matter if it's 35,000, which sometimes you see reflected. You don't see quantities, but I'm telling you, that's the range from a quiet day to a busy day. The percentages are mostly the same. And you can see that, you know, I can't mouse around and show you. The purple and the blue, you can see where it says 802.11 N and 11G. Basically a third of this graph are 2.4 gig devices. I mean, this is reality. This is the real world. And some of you are probably thinking, okay, well, maybe you didn't optimize it right, and maybe you didn't do a bunch of stuff to drive people over to 5. So, you know, the problem is you didn't do things right. Well, let's move out of one of my environments and let's look at a bigger sampling. This is taken, again, a couple days ago. If you look at that link, voyancelive.niansa.com, they make this available publicly. It's an aggregation of all kinds of information they get from their, you know, different customers that use Niansa. So here we see that, you know, we got millions of devices in play, almost 4 million devices, and 70% of them are 5 gig capable. 30% of millions of devices reflected in these sampling, and this is across all kinds of industries. You know, Niansa plays in all kinds of spaces. You've got a full 30% of the wireless clients in use out in a whole slew of networks that can't do 5 gig. I mean, this is telling. This is telling the story that 2.4 gig simply is not dead. And if you believe it is, I challenge you to turn off your 2.4. And I don't think most of us could get away with it. You know, maybe we'd have to add APs, maybe we'd have to do all kinds of stuff once we do it. I'm sure some of you could, depending on your client mix, but you know, by and large, I'm going to say most of us probably can't. It's kind of a rhetorical declaration. You know, we'll never really know, but you know, when I look at these numbers, it kind of tells me a lot. The other part about it is, you know, at this volume, if the fact that 2.4 gig is being used was an actual problem, I think we'd be hearing more about it. You know, a lot of devices use it just because it works, and it's not a problem for the devices that are using it in a lot of networks that are well managed. So, you know, I look at these metrics and it's not dead because it's very much alive, as silly as that sounds. So, you know, we kind of fast forward to what's happening today. You know, I told you that, you know, 2.4 gig is kind of the, you know, where it all started on the older standards. And, you know, now we're up to Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E with the, you know, 6 gig spectrum. And, you know, 6E is going to change everything. It's going to totally make this a moot point. And the answer to that is no, it really won't, for the same old reasons. New spectrum is absolutely wonderful. The vast majority of our laptops and our smartphones and, you know, our compute devices that, you know, any of us are likely to use, eventually will find their way into the 6 gig spectrum, but a whole bunch of stuff won't. And if you kind of go back in your mind to that Nyansa slide and those millions of client devices, they're not all smartphones, they're not all laptops. Even with the advent of 6 gig, some devices are still just going to roll along in 2.4 because that's all they need. And it's cheap to make those chipsets. And the reference designs are a bazillion years old and proven. And a lot of, you know, devices just don't need to, just aren't going to really get much out of a redesign, you know, to get them up to 5 gig. There's no gain to it for what little data they do. I'm talking about like things like wireless locks in my world. They occasionally transmit just a little bit of data. You know, they're on 2.4 gig now, 11M 2.4 gig. To re-outfit them might make me feel better as a purist that doesn't want anything in 2.4 gig, but the device itself really doesn't benefit that much. So, you know, I'm saying, you know, it's a new world, but the old world still is with us, at least for the foreseeable future. And then just a reminder, you know, these are all the things that we do to herd clients over to 5 gig. We kind of sometimes trip over ourselves trying to get, you know, all the clients we can to 5 gig. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Not totally. Some of these are, some of these I don't care for, but this is kind of the toolbox we've got when the question is, well, how do we make people use 5 gig? You know, band steering was kind of a interesting approach. Unfortunately, it's proprietary. All the vendors do it slightly different, and a lot of times it's problematic. People try to use it, they end up turning it off because it causes problems. It's not, again, it's not standards based, which means people can do different things to make it happen, and it's not always a good fit for all of the clients in a given environment, and you end up turning it off. At least that's been my personal experience multiple times. Sometimes we turn off, you know, some of the 2.4 gig radios, depending on, you know, what the situation is. I know in LPVs that I manage, the large public venues, I have places where there is no 2.4 enabled. RRM and, flex radios and the latest generation of hardware, and you let the environment decide whether a radio is 2.4 or 5 gig. Sometimes we do the separate ID thing, and you call it, whatever, my network fast, my network slow. I don't care for that to the same degree that I don't care for band steering. I know some people are a big proponent of it. I just think it junks up your SSID list. And again, for most devices, I don't really see the benefit for what most people are doing. And again, I can only give you my frame of reference and my opinions. If you're somebody who uses it and loves it, more power to you. This is a field where there is room for opinion and different approaches. So I don't begrudge anybody for doing it their way if it works for them. And then you can do, combinations, permutations of SSIDs versus what radio. And, maybe you've got a dual band AP, but you only let an SSID come out of a given radio and not both, or whatever. Hopefully you guys get it. There's different things we can do to push people to 5 gig. Despite all of the things that we do and we try. Thank you, Scott. Scott posted this morning, and when I saw it, I realized it was just perfect for this presentation. I don't even know what it is that he's trying to add, but he says it's some IoT device, and I have seen this myself. I'm thinking of TP-Link power strip. I'm thinking of a light panel. I can't remember the brand, the fancy. You can program these triangle shaped light panels to do different colors and give you mood lighting and ambiance and all of this stuff. And I've seen them where they have dual band radios that they won't use. They have to have 2.4 for some reason. It's crazy, but this is the world that we live in. 2.4, the device manufacturers, for many, many reasons, some that might make sense and some that are purely obvious. They don't know what the hell they're doing. Some of them are just so grounded in 2.4, it is not going away. So come back to the AX, come back to the AX discussion, right? As I said before, fat channels aren't the only thing that we strive for, or some people get hung up on it. It's not the only payoff, right? Better radios, better memory, better CPU, better everything on a new AP. But then also we've got the notion of the resource units, right? This is 11AX, it's dual band. If the whole RU thing plays out right, and if the standard, the way it's written, actually lives up to its billing, there's a lot that remains to be seen on this. Maybe 2.4 gets more efficient. Maybe even 20 meg, the device doesn't need it, and all it needs is 4 or whatever, 4, 8, 2, 6. So maybe those channels get used more efficiently, and 2.4, as messy as it is, gets run a little more. I hate to keep on using the word efficiently, but that's what comes to mind. It may very well get more efficient, but we'll have to see how that plays out. Regardless, right? Third bullet down, 2.4 isn't dead. It's not on vacation. It's not hiding. It's not in the closet, ashamed of itself. It's very much with us, and you can deny it, and you can try to wish it away like Johnny in the cornfield on the Twilight Zone, and it just doesn't go away. It's with us. It's alive. Everything in life changes. Nothing stays the same over time. Things evolve. 2.4 gig is evolving, and I say to you, that's it. There's nothing more to it. It has not died. It's just changing. And here we have Mark 2.4 Twain. And, he kind of said, Mark Twain actually gave us the quote, the report of my death was an exaggeration. And if you research it, you'll find that there's actually a few different variants on what he really said, but the essence was there. It's kind of funny. He's a famous writer in American history. He was actually traveling Europe trying to make some money because I guess he got into a whole bunch of bad business deals. And, he was in the poorhouse and he owed a lot of money. And while he was doing that European tour, somebody reported that he was sick, and then somebody reported that he was dead, and he read about it while he was overseas. And that's where the quote came out. And, just a fascinating guy and a little bit of humor that gave us a saying that fits when we talk about 2.4 gig. And with that, we'll have a discussion, maybe a nap, and then we'll all go jump in the pool.
Well, thanks, Lee. That was awesome. I do have a few comments. I thought, and you touched on this, but a lot of the pain in 2.4 gigahertz for Wi-Fi, at least in the enterprise, from what I've seen, a lot of it's kind of self-inflicted. We do designs that are appropriate for 5 gigahertz, and then often I'll see networks where every single 2.4 gigahertz radio is enabled in what's essentially a high density design. So there's a massive amount of CCI and 2.4 gigahertz, and the band's just being eaten alive by beacon frames. And it really just doesn't have to be that way. If you go through, disable a lot of those radios, tune your data rates, you can get much better performance out of the band. It's not as good as 5 gigahertz, and it's not great in high density, but you can make it work. And I think your experience shows some of that too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's there's the when you do the after survey validation or the after install validation too. Like I've seen using flex radios, if you let the system decide, well, if you install a whole bunch of APs and then you're using RRM and then you immediately see what's going on, it might take a day, 2 days, at least in my findings, for RRM to actually settle things out and start disabling 2.4 gig radios and such. So if you've got a good RRM algorithm, maybe it can take care of some of the problems that you're talking about if you give it time to do its job. Or you can put them all in, see that 2.4 gig is chaos, and then immediately start maybe disabling the wrong radio, or maybe just out of desperation start taking it the opposite direction. Instead of too much, now there's too little. And whatever the particulars of the situation, though, you absolutely nailed it. You design for 5 gig and 2.4 just comes along for the ride. Well, it shouldn't be like that. You should be designing for both, if both are going to be there, even if you have to wait a couple of days to see if RRM got anything close to what you had in mind for 2.4. But yeah, it's absolutely easy to shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I also want to invite anybody in the audience to submit a question for us, so we can bounce that off Lee. The other comment I had, as far as I can see, 2.4 gigahertz will always be a part of Wi-Fi. It's, at least now, driven by the IoT use case. And that's something that the IEEE, talks about a lot. They talked about it a lot with 802.11ax about bringing IoT specific features into Wi-Fi to be able to address that use case a little bit more. And if you think about IoT devices that might have a packet or two to send every hour, maybe every day, what's the point of using a more expensive, higher performance 5 gigahertz or 6 gigahertz radio when 2.4 gigahertz will do just fine for that? So I actually, I think the use of 2.4 gigahertz will only go up, being driven by IoT and Wi-Fi as a platform for that.
Yeah, that's also an excellent point. I mean, to me, some stuff under the heading of IoT shouldn't be in Wi-Fi, period. It ought to be off using, low-run WAN or different technologies. But, that's one more thing that I can whine about and complain about, and nothing happens, and still more and more of it shows up in Wi-Fi. So we are
Yeah.
stuck with it. Another, you had mentioned the IEEE. As long as this whole backwards compatibility at all costs thing prevails too, we're never going to be done with 2.4. That alone is enough reason for a lot of device makers to just keep on trucking and never evolve and never modernize their stuff, even in cases where maybe it should. But when backwards compatibility is, seems to be a really high priority that I don't understand. It seems like sooner or later you can, decouple some of the stuff from the past and to make for a better future, but it's just not the case. Again, it falls under the heading of things I wish were different, but just because I say that they should be, it doesn't make it so, kind of thing. Some of it just ends up being whining.
Yeah, I agree. It does just from a technology perspective look like there are better wireless protocols than Wi-Fi for a lot of IoT use cases. But, for a IoT device manufacturer, it's very tempting just to say, hey, Wi-Fi's out there, all my customers will have Wi-Fi, so I'm gonna go with Wi-Fi instead of trying to convince them to deploy a whole new wireless infrastructure. So
Yeah, and the challenge there is absolutely agree. Wi-Fi is a siren song. How many vendors will approach non-IT parts of your organization and say, "Oh, you got Wi-Fi? Our stuff works on Wi-Fi." Forget the fact that it can't do anything but maybe 11B data rates, and forget the fact that it can't do enterprise security. The fact that you have Wi-Fi, boom, sold. I'll take it. We'll just run it on our Wi-Fi, and then you find out all the baggage that it hands your Wi-Fi team, where now you've got to all of a sudden, maybe do things you don't want to do, and maybe even violate your own policy to accommodate some of these things. But that is just our reality. It's kind of a really messy world right now, and the fact that 2.4, for better or worse, is going to keep on keeping on. I mean, it's just part of that messiness.
So, good follow-up question here from Steven. He says, are you aware of any moves by vendors to develop a framework for enterprise class IoT devices rather than basing their products on consumer grade chipsets, i.e. the cheapest?
I don't know of any kind of movement afoot. I do know that I can think of a few different recent IoT type things that I've had to use and support or dismiss as unsupportable or whatever. But we've got locks from a company called ASA Abloy, and they do 802.1x and they do 802.11n. And even though they're an IoT device, a lock and a door, they're a really good enterprise device. We've got time clocks. I won't name the vendor, but they took a $10 StarTech crappy USB adapter that I'm sure they're charging hundreds and hundreds of dollars for as a wireless option. And these clocks, they took this USB adapter, buried it in the innards of a clock, behind LCD screens, and sandwiched between circuit boards with lots of metal brackets around it and lots of heat. And these things are absolute garbage. And oh, by the way, they don't do much in the way of anything enterprise. And oh, would you mind giving each one of them their own AP and SSID? And you've got hundreds of them in your enterprise. I mean, just clueless. We've got a product we're evaluating now that's, I don't want to give too much away, but this is an appliance that's appliances with embedded Raspberry Pi. They are 3B plus Raspberry Pi models. So far, they seem to be excellent wireless devices on 802.1x and on the enterprise Wi-Fi. All the things you'd want from them. They roam, they reply like if an AP goes down or changes its channel, they seamlessly roam, even though they're not physically roaming. They jump to another AP when they need to. They authenticate. They do everything right. And then there's a temperature probe that again is just terrible, and it's just never going to work, never going to fit, and all kinds of goofy requirements. So, it's a long answer to your question, but I'm not seeing it totally bad. I am seeing some vendors that somehow they got the message, or they have good developers that are in touch with the world. But boy, this is an area where I would love to see the Wi-Fi Alliance get involved and just reform the client device industry, as my rant and soapbox.
Yeah, and I liked, an earlier comment you had about how valuable it'd be to have consumer versus enterprise certification, and much more thorough testing from the Wi-Fi Alliance. I think maybe there's room for a third class for IoT devices. Because when I kind of think about this question, when I think enterprise class, to me that's 802.11ax, that's dual band, certainly 802.1x, good mobility. But a lot of IoT stuff doesn't need that. Think about the door lock you mentioned. It's fine at 802.11n with 2.4 gigahertz only and no roaming algorithm at all because it's a door. So, the requirements are different. So it's hard to say what an enterprise class IoT device really is, but, one of the parts of the question is, are vendors using the cheapest consumer grade chipsets they can find? And often that is the case, because they're selling these devices in very high volume and what they want to keep the cost as low as possible. So it's much more common today still to see, just, anecdotally, I think, but it's more common to see 802.11g devices that are IoT devices that are brand new on the market than 802.11ax IoT devices, just because it's driven by cost, and that ancient PHY meets their performance requirements.
Yep, fully agree.
Comment here from Tim. He says, I agree with Lee. Don't give it up. How many people remember the fight to get 5 gigahertz in the first place? And I think that was a big effort for a lot of people in the Wi-Fi industry to get access to that spectrum there in the 5 gigahertz band. We've just seen it in the 6 gigahertz band too. That was not easy at all. Lee, maybe one last question here from Gary. Kind of a tough one. I don't know if there's a good answer here, but Gary asks, what's the best way to limit Bluetooth interference? And I know you, with, college students and their smartphones and all the kit they bring to school and to the dorms, I mean, they're all going to have Bluetooth running. And it's a pipe dream to say, oh, that stuff's prohibited on campus. So any ideas there?
No, I mean, if you go back to physics, the only way you're going to prevent interference is with shielding or distance. And, you just have to a lot of times be mindful that it's there, and, don't factor it out when you're troubleshooting. I do know that I'm thinking Zigbee. If you stretch the question and include Zigbee, certain Zigbee systems, you can say don't use these particular frequencies, so you can kind of do a channel plan to make sure that the Zigbee doesn't step on Wi-Fi, but that's really not Bluetooth as asked. If you can get away with, if you know your Wi-Fi clients really, really well, and you know that maybe you really don't need 2.4, you can skew away from using it. Where you need a whole bunch of important Bluetooth devices, but you hit it on the head with your first sentence. There's not going to be a good answer, but it comes down to physics and frequency coordination, and you do what you can do, and you live with what you can't control, and that again is just our reality. But it does help to be able to know what's in the area, characterize it, and know what it is that you're trying to juggle when you have to get into the frequency juggling act. Otherwise, you're just, going blind and, not seeing things that are important to your troubleshooting.
Yeah, it's really just a fact of life in the 2.4 gigahertz band. Anywhere you've got the public, there, there's going to be particularly BLE interference, and so you just have to live with it and make sure your performance requirements for your Wi-Fi devices are still being met despite of it. So, all right, Don, I think that about wraps it up.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Lee. Great job today, as always. Really enjoy having Lee here, and I know we've gotten some great comments. Lee, if you have a moment, take a look at some of those. Some great feedback today. We'll definitely have Lee back, as we always do. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We've got a great webinar set up next Wednesday, even though it's a holiday week over here. Why mediocre Wi-Fi isn't enough for high-density areas. So we'll be ready for you all next week. We'll see you then. Enjoy the weekend, everyone.
Enjoy that pool, Lee.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Tom.
You bet.
See ya.
See ya.